The year 1860 stretched over the English countryside with cool, quiet afternoons. In a modest house on the outskirts of the village of Wetherford, lived Anne Foster, a young woman of 26 whose delicate beauty drew the attention of everyone, though no one managed to penetrate the wall of reserve she had built around her heart. And didn't spend her days at balls or on promenades, as was expected of a lady her age. Her true passion lay at that dark wooden desk, lit each night by a flickering candle. There, her quill eagerly glided across the paper, breathing life into stories that moved thousands of readers under a name that wasn't hers, Dick Perry. That pseudonym, born first as a shield against editors' distrust of female writers, had transformed over the years into a second skin. Under that male mask, and found the freedom to say what the world would never accept from female lips. And, at the same time, she kept the secret of her authorship intact. The only person who shared that truth was her Aunt Beatrice, her deceased mother's sister. Tasked with managing the local mail, she took care of sending each carefully sealed manuscript. With a silent complicity, they both maintained the illusion that Mr. Perry existed. That night, Anne put down her quill and sat up, rubbing her ink-stained hands. She looked at the paper, still damp with newly written words, and for a moment, a satisfied smile played on her lips. But it was brief. Her gaze clouded as she recalled what that triumph meant, the recognition of everyone, yes, but for a man who had never existed. She sighed. The loneliness that enveloped her secret was a high price, one she had been willing to pay until now. In the distance, the sound of hooves on the village cobblestones broke the silence of the night. And still unaware of the fate approaching, blew out the candle and sank into bed, not suspecting that her life was about to change forever. The village of Wetherford awoke with a different air that spring morning. In the central square, merchants routinely opened their stalls, but curious eyes turned to a dark carriage that had stopped in front of the inn. From it descended a man of elegant bearing, about 35 years old, with a penetrating gaze and the confident stride of someone accustomed to observing everything. His name was John Alcott, a journalist from London, sent to investigate what had been stirring whispers in the capital's literary circles for months, the mysterious identity of the writer Dick Perry. And Foster, still unaware of the stranger's true mission, went to the local post office to help her Aunt Beatrice sort the letters. She wore a simple blue dress, and her hair was gathered with discreet elegance. As she entered, the sound of a deep voice made her stop. "Good morning," John said, bowing courteously to Mrs. Beatrice. "I'm looking for information about correspondence sent to London." Anne raised her eyes and met his for the first time. It was a fleeting instant, but enough to feel a shiver she couldn't explain. John, for his part, was immediately captivated by the serenity of those clear eyes that seemed to hide a whole world behind their calm. "My niece," said Beatrice, noticing the subtle tension. "And this is Mr. Alcott." He gave a slight bow. "A pleasure, Miss Foster," and replied with impeccable politeness, though her tone was colder than she had intended. There was something about this man that stirred a dangerous unease in her. John didn't fail to notice. Accustomed to reading between the lines, he knew immediately that this young woman wasn't as distant as she pretended. A shadow of a secret could be sensed in her restrained voice. And instead of pushing him away, that reserve ignited an even deeper curiosity in him. That same afternoon, John walked the cobbled streets, listening to comments from the locals. Everyone spoke proudly of the enigmatic Dick Perry, whose pen seemed to have emerged from their own village. John smiled, ironically. He was determined to get to the bottom of this mystery. And though he didn't yet suspect it, the key to everything was much closer than he imagined, in the woman he hadn't been able to get out of his mind since he saw her. The village of Wetherford moved with the usual serenity of spring afternoons. Women gathered in the square to chat, children played around the fountain, and gentlemen discussed business at the corner cafe. Amidst this coming and going, Anne Foster walked with a light step, carrying a small package under her arm that she needed to deliver to the post office. Since she had met John Alcott 3 days ago, her tranquility had been disturbed. She couldn't deny that the journalist's image returned to her thoughts again and again, like a shadow impossible to shake. There was something in his gaze, in the way he observed the world, that stirred a dangerous unease in her, and hated feeling vulnerable. Entering the post office, she found her Aunt Beatrice chatting animatedly with John. The man, standing by the counter, seemed to have made a habit of stopping by every morning, always with some excuse, a letter to send, a newspaper to pick up, some information to request. "Miss Foster," John said when he saw her enter, bowing his head courteously. "How fortunate I am to find you here," and responded with a measured gesture, hiding the disquiet his presence caused her. "Good morning, Mr. Alcott." Beatrice, with that shrewd look that had so often made her niece uncomfortable, smiled to herself. She could feign distraction, but she knew that this stranger had managed to disturb the calm she so painstakingly tried to maintain. John spoke again, with that soft but insistent tone that seemed to brook no refusal. "I must confess that I feel a bit lost in this village. Would it be too much trouble to ask you to show me some of its most interesting spots?" And hesitated. She wanted to refuse, but the anticipation in her aunt's eyes and John's polite firmness left her without an argument. "I suppose there would be no inconvenience in showing you the convent gardens. It's a short walk." So it was that, a couple of hours later, they were walking together among the fragrant paths of lilacs and honeysuckle. The silence, at first awkward, broke when John pointed to a stone bench by the fountain. "Allow me to say something, Miss Foster." His voice took on a serious tone. "Since I arrived in Wetherford, I felt that everyone here holds secrets. Little stories hidden behind kind faces. And I believe you have one too." And stopped dead, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know what you mean," she replied in a thin voice, struggling to maintain her composure. John barely smiled, not taking his eyes off her. "Don't fear, it's not a reproach. I just observe. You speak little, but each word seems carefully chosen, as if you're afraid of revealing more than necessary. And though I've only just met you, I feel you hide a whole world behind that silence." And looked away, pretending to examine the flowers in the garden. Those words had struck too close to the truth. "Perhaps I simply like discretion," she replied coldly. "Perhaps," John said, leaning towards her gently. "But it's also possible that discretion is a mask. And I assure you, Miss Foster, nothing intrigues me more than discovering what's hidden behind a mask." The silence between them became charged with tension, and felt a shiver run down her skin, and for a moment, she wished to confess everything to him. But reason reasserted itself. Her secret could not come to light. Not now, not with him so close to the truth. She rose from the bench with a quick gesture. "It's best we return. The day is getting on, and I have things to do." John nodded, though his dark eyes shone with the certainty that he had touched a sensitive point. "Of course. I thank you for the company." They walked back in silence, and struggled to regain her composure, while John, behind his apparent calm, repeated a single thought to himself. This woman hid a mystery, and he was determined to uncover it, even if it risked his own heart along the way. The church bells announced noon when John Alcott stopped at the village tavern. He was a man accustomed to seeking information in the most common places, where trivial conversations could reveal more than official documents. He ordered a pint of ale and listened carefully. It didn't take long to hear what he expected. A group of locals spoke with pride of the enigmatic writer Dick Perry, the illustrious son, who, according to them, had put Wetherford on the literary map. "No one really knows who he is," one of the men was saying. "But I'd wager he lives among us. Where else would he get so much inspiration?" John smiled to himself. Every word confirmed what he had suspected. The key to his search was in this small village, and he wouldn't rest until he found it. That same afternoon, he stopped by the post office. Beatrice, as always, received him courteously, and, however, remained seated behind a desk, reviewing papers. She tried to appear indifferent, though John's presence made her skin prickle. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the journalist greeted. "I need to send a letter to London." Beatrice took the envelope, but John didn't leave right away. "I wonder," he added in a casual tone, If you've ever had the honor of sending correspondence to Mr. Perry. Anne's head snapped up. Her gaze met John's, and for an instant, she feared he had seen in her eyes the truth she was so hard-pressed to hide. Beatrice, however, didn't lose her composure. Mr. Perry, you say? I've heard of his books, of course. But I couldn't tell you where he writes from. The post office sends hundreds of letters every week. John watched her with a half-smile. I understand. Although it's curious. I'm told that Perry's style reflects places in this region in great detail. Also, from my research, I know that the material for the publisher was sent from this very post office. And then intervened, with a calmness she didn't feel. Perhaps the author passed through here once. Or he simply imagined what he never saw. Writers have that gift, don't you think? Her tone was so serene that anyone would have been convinced. But not John. There was a contained vibration in that answer, as if the words had been carefully measured. You're right, Miss Foster, he replied, bowing his head slightly. Writers invent worlds, though sometimes, those worlds reveal more than they themselves wish to show. The silence that followed was thick. Anne lowered her eyes back to the desk, pretending to focus on the papers. John looked at her for a moment longer, and then left. That night, Anne couldn't sleep. She paced back and forth in her room, her heart heavy. With each passing day, John was getting closer to discovering the truth. And what was worse, instead of wanting to push him away, she felt a deeper and deeper attraction to him. She remembered, with a mix of fear and sweetness, the words she had heard him say in the tavern. If Perry knew how much good he's done for me with his books, I'd want to tell him. And closed her eyes. In that instant, she understood that John didn't just admire the author. He admired the essence of who she was in secret. And that thought filled her with hope, but also with an indescribable panic. Because if the truth ever came to light, she didn't know if he would be able to forgive her for the lie. The following days brought soft rains over Wetherford. The streets were covered in puddles and the air smelled of damp earth and freshly opened lilacs. For many, it was tedious weather, but for Anne Foster, it was a refuge. The perfect excuse to lock herself in her study, write late into the night, and avoid unnecessary encounters. At least, that's what she tried to do. Because John Alcott seemed determined not to give her a moment's peace. One afternoon, as Anne walked with a book under her arm toward the parish library, she found him on the same path, protected by a simple black umbrella. Miss Foster, he greeted her with his deep, cordial voice. Allow me to accompany you. And hesitated. A part of her wanted to refuse, as always. But another, more powerful part, wanted to hear his voice, to feel that dangerous closeness. In the end, she gave a minimal nod. They walked together under the same umbrella, the inevitable brush of their shoulders sparking a silent electricity. The patter of the rain on the canvas enveloped them like an intimate music, separate from the rest of the world. I've noticed, John said, after a long silence, that you read with true devotion. May I ask what book you're holding now? Anne clutched the volume to her chest. It's a novel by Dick Perry, she confessed, knowing that name was a razor's edge. John raised his eyebrows with interest. Ah, Perry. The author no one knows. He watched her closely, as if seeking a reaction. I must admit, he's been with me for years. His pages have given me strength in the worst of times. And felt a knot in her throat. She wanted to smile, but only managed a trembling gesture. Then, his work has been valuable to you. Far more than I could explain, he replied in a low, almost intimate voice. I don't know who this man is or why he hides, but I wonder if deep down, Perry writes because his heart is crying out to be heard. And stopped short in the downpour. She looked at him with bright eyes, surprised by the accuracy of his words. For an instant, she forgot the disguise, the lie, the risk. There was only this veiled confession that seemed to speak directly to her soul. But reason caught up with her again. She straightened her back, regaining her cold tone. Perhaps you idealize a writer who, after all, might be no more than a peddler of words. John watched her in silence. He didn't believe her answer, but he didn't contradict her. Instead, he took a step forward and, gently, brushed a damp lock of hair that had escaped from her bun. The touch of his fingers against her cheek made her shiver. "I don't know what secrets you keep, Miss Foster," he murmured, "but I do know this: you are the most fascinating woman I have ever met." And held her breath. Her whole body begged to surrender to this attraction, to confess everything, to let John know her true self. But fear was stronger. She took a step back, breaking the spell. "Don't say that, Mr. Alcott. You barely know me." He held her gaze, firm, intense. Sometimes, a few days are enough to recognize what others can't in a lifetime. And didn't reply. She walked again in the rain, her heart pounding at the brink of overflow. And as John followed her in silence, she knew that it was becoming harder and harder to maintain the mask she had built for years. Because, with him, that mask was slowly crumbling. The sky over Wetherford was overcast that afternoon, as if it sensed the storm brewing in the hearts of two people. John Alcott had spent the morning in the parish library, reviewing old records, letters, and local newspapers. Among them, he found a minor but revealing detail: a letter sent to London 6 years ago, addressed to the same publishing house that first published Dick Perry. The signature was illegible, but the handwriting, the slant of each stroke, was familiar to him. Hours later, at the post office, when he saw Anne Foster sign a note for her Aunt Beatrice, he understood. The calligraphy was identical. His heart raced. All his journalistic instincts cried out that he had found the truth, but at the same time, his soul trembled. How to confront her without hurting her? How not to destroy that fragile thing that was only just beginning to blossom between them? And was putting envelopes into a drawer when John entered. The twilight gloom filtered through the windows, gilding the room with a soft light. She barely looked at him, with that mix of attraction and wariness he always inspired in her. "Miss Foster," he said in a grave voice, "I need to speak with you, alone." Beatrice, who was organizing correspondence behind the counter, understood instantly and discreetly left, leaving them in a thick tension. John approached her slowly. "I've been tracking Perry," he confessed without preamble, "and I believe he's no longer a mystery to me," and felt the blood drain from her face. Her fingers clenched the edge of the desk. "I don't know what you're talking about," she murmured, forcing herself to sound firm. John took a deep breath, trying to contain his emotion. "I know it's you, Anne. The same handwriting, the same expressions. You are Dick Perry." Silence fell like a blow. Anne didn't respond, but her eyes widened with a glint of fear and contained fury. "You're mistaken," she exclaimed, her voice cracking. "That accusation is absurd." John took another step, but his tone was not one of reproach, but of pleading. "Don't lie to me. Not to me. I've admired those words for years, and now, standing in front of you, I understand why they felt so alive. Because they carry your soul." And trembled. For the first time in a long time, tears threatened to overflow. "Do you realize what you're saying? If anyone else were to suspect, they would take everything from me. My books, my reputation, my entire life." John raised his hand, as if to reach for her, but held back. "Then let me be your ally, not your enemy. I will keep your secret if you wish, but don't deny it to me. Because I know, Anne. I feel it here." He brought his hand to his chest. "And believe me, there's nothing in the world that could make me admire you less." Anne's defenses were crumbling. She wanted to trust him, to open her heart to the man who, for the first time, seemed to see her completely. But fear was stronger. Abruptly, she took the envelopes and turned back to the shelf. "I beg you not to insist, Mr. Alcott. You are mistaken. And if you value my peace of mind, don't mention it again." John looked at her, with a pain that crossed his face. "As you wish. But know this, what I feel for you doesn't depend on a name on a book cover. It doesn't matter if you're Anne Foster or Dick Perry. What matters to me is you." His words floated in the air, deep and final. And before Anne could reply, John left, leaving her with a heart torn between the desire to believe him and the fear of trusting. That night, Anne stayed awake until dawn. The secret she had protected for so long was in danger. And, even worse, so was her heart. The rumor had arrived from London like distant thunder that soon became a storm. The publishing house that published Dick Parry was demanding that the mysterious author appear in person for a literary event. The public clamored to meet the man behind the novels. Success, which until then had protected and under the veil of anonymity, was now becoming her greatest threat. In the main room of the house, Beatrice spread the letter on the table. "There's no escape, Anne. If you don't show up, the publisher will take it as an insult. And if you do show up—" She trailed off, looking at her niece with a grave expression. "Everyone will know the truth," and clenched her fists. She paced back and forth, her heart pounding wildly. "All my life I've feared this moment. I don't know if I'm ready to endure the mockery, the scorn, or the recognition." Another voice interjected, and turned. John Alcott was there, in the doorway, his face serious but his eyes filled with a warm determination. Beatrice discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone. John walked slowly toward her. "The secret you defended so much is in danger, yes. But ask yourself, and, is it worth it to keep hiding? You are the pen that moved thousands, not that invented man. And I admire you even more for the courage it took to have written every one of those pages." And looked at him, tears trembling in her eyes. "What if they reject me? What if the world condemns me for having deceived everyone?" John took her hand with a tenderness that disarmed her last defenses. "Then I will be by your side. I didn't seek you out for a newspaper story, Anne. I sought you out, because from the very first moment, I knew you were different. And now I know it with certainty. I love you, with your secrets and your fears, with your true name or the invented one." And closed her eyes, letting herself be held by that confession. For the first time in years, she felt that someone saw the woman behind the writer and accepted her completely. The decision formed within her like a flame that grows until it becomes fire. She opened her eyes and looked at him with firmness. "Then there will be no more masks. I'll go to London. Not as Parry. Not as a shadow. I'll go as what I always was, and Foster." John smiled, overwhelmed with relief. "And I'll be there, applauding louder than anyone." That night, Anne returned to her desk. The candle illuminated the blank paper, and for the first time in a long time, she wrote not as a phantom, but as herself. "My name is Anne Foster, and this is my voice." After finishing the sentence, she put down the quill and took a deep breath. The fear was still there, but so was a new peace and a bright hope. Because she knew that no matter what happened, she was no longer alone. The spring of 1861 filled London with scents and expectant voices. The main hall of the publishing house was packed with readers, critics, and journalists. Everyone awaited the celebrated Dick Parry, the enigmatic author who had conquered England with his novels. When the presenter announced the name, a murmur ran through the room. And then, among light dresses and dark suits, Anne Foster appeared, poised and serene. There were no disguises, no masks, no hesitation. Only the woman who for years had written in silence, now ready to show herself to the world. There was a moment of astonishment, followed by a growing murmur, and finally, by an applause that shook the walls. Anne smiled, with contained tears, as she saw how disbelief turned into admiration. For the first time, she was receiving recognition not for an invented name, but for her own. In the crowd, John Alcott stood up. His eyes met hers, and in that gaze, Anne found everything she needed: support, pride, love. That night, as they left the hall, John took her hand under the lit street lamps. London shone around them, but for them, there was only the certainty of a shared future. "There are no more secrets between us," Anne murmured, resting her head on his shoulder. "Only truths," John replied, kissing her forehead. "And the greatest of all is that I love you." And closed her eyes, letting the moment envelop her. She had fought against her fears, against conventions, against her own silence. And she had won. Because she had found what every human being longs for, the freedom to be herself, and a true love to accompany her on that journey. And so, as the city continued its incessant course, and Foster knew that her life, and her stories, were only just beginning. Did this story catch your attention? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to be part of our community, subscribe and hit the bell to always stay in the loop. I truly appreciate your support.